This video started out trying to answer a question one of my daughters had. She came out to visit at the end of the summer, and we found ourselves talking about drawing quite a bit, about how artists take those early measurements. We'd planned to go to Yosemite National Park, and it seemed like the perfect chance to show how it works in real time. But it didn't really help her. She had the camera right in my shoulder and was recording everything, but she couldn't see what my eyes were seeing. So while I was taking measurements, all she could see was my hand floating around in the air and the drawing magically appearing on the paper. So with this video, I took the extra time needed in After Effects to show exactly what my eyes were seeing and measuring. Then when I finally thought I was finished and looked at it with fresh eyes, the blocky measurement drawing looked so unfinished. Those were just the steps I took to get it on paper where I wanted. I realized it needed more. I should take several days and make a finished drawing so you could see the results of all the steps. Each day I got to where I thought, well, there, that should do it. Then when I looked at it the next morning, I saw there was still more work needed. It's easy to feel frustrated at how long our artwork can take. In Loish's recent newsletter, she talked about how frustrating and boring it feels at how long her paintings take. She showed a calendar with several 4-hour blocks of time reserved. We see artists' early stages and time lapses, and it's easy to think, oh, cool, how hard can it be? So this video altogether shows my drawing process in real time and thinking that goes into it. At the end of each day's recording, I thought I was done, so excuse how disjointed it may come across. It actually took 4 days of recording and many days editing to get to this point. The French poet Paul Valéry said, "A work is never completed, but abandoned." I could have taken the drawing farther, but I stopped when I finally reached the place where I felt, okay, close enough. I hope you find it helpful, and like and subscribe and all that stuff.
Hey, we're at Yosemite, and what we're trying to do is show how when you are looking at a big scene and you want to get the scene on the paper and not run out of room. A lot of times you go, oh, that's nice. You start drawing and then, oh, suddenly you're out of room. So this is all ready. If you want to come around, I'll show you the scene that we're looking at. We're at Glacier Point in Yosemite National Park looking at Half Dome. And so I want to do a drawing that's got Half Dome and this little bit of the valley here in front of it. And there's a couple of trees here, and I want that to be the edge, and I want that tree to be the other edge. So I've got here, these are the marks. And so now what I'm trying to do is I need to find where's the middle of what we're looking at. In the middle, from that tree, I'm closing one eye, and I'm putting the edge of the pencil against the tree over here. And I can see that there's a clump. There's a little bump right there from Half Dome. There's that bump right there. That's going to be in the middle. So I'm just checking my paper, and I'm going, well, I think that's the middle. And oops, I'm short. I need a little more room. So I'm going from here to the middle. I think that's close enough. I think that's the middle. Let me just double check. Whoa. There. To there, I was off. It's going to be there. From the tree to the middle. Tree to the middle. So that is where the little hump of Half Dome, there's a bump on that rock. And now how tall is all of this? in the foreground, I've got some trees, some little bushes down here. And that's going to be the bottom. And I know that I want the top of Half Dome. But what I'm looking at, I think it's going to be about 1/2. So if I take that same measure from the tree to the halfway point and move it from these trees to the top, that's actually 1/2. So that 1/2 distance is how tall it is. So I just need to double check that same distance. And I know that from where those trees are to the top up there is where the top of the Half Dome is going to be. And I think that's about, and this is where you double check, because if these measurements are correct, that looks good, that looks good. If those measurements are correct, the rest of your drawing is going to be, it'll all fit. So let's just take a quick one last look. That's 1/2, that's 1/2, and that's about the top. So I know that from the halfway point, and there's the top, but how far over are things? I need a finer measure than just 1/2. So I'm going to estimate where 1/3 of things are. See if I can break this into 3 pieces. So I get to the edge of the trees, and I look at it, and you just take a guess, and you say, I think from the edge of those trees to there, and you step it out. You go, there's 1, 2, 3. Lucky me. Let me double check. 1. Oh. And this is hard. If you're doing this, it's going to be bigger or smaller. So try to keep it this. When you find something that works, hold it and step it and step it. Let me do that. I think it's the front of the Half Dome. Front of Half Dome to the tree. There it is to there. There, that's good. So if I can, now I'm going to break this back down here and take a guess in thirds. And I think that's a third. Let me just do a quick 1, 2, 3. I'm short. So it's going to be probably here. Let's try that. And I've got 1, 2, 3. That's not too shabby. So at that 1/3 point, that's actually where Half Dome is, that face of Half Dome. And I know this is the top of Half Dome at 1/3. Now what's happening at this other third? There's 1, 2, 3. Something should be happening around that spot. Let me find this measurement up here and go, there's the tree, there's Half Dome, and I come over. It's the face of that other, I don't know the name of that domish rock right there, but it is happening at about the third. And so now that I've got some of these landmarks in place, I know that I marked this half point, but it's really high. If I look and start measuring this way, I'll go, there's the top of Half Dome and that bump, and from there to these bushes. So half of this distance, let's take a quick measure and go 1, I'm a little short. I need it to be right there to right, a little short still. There to there, there to there. There we go. Now I'm going to erase some stuff. It's in the wrong place. Those 2 were wrong. And I know that that is where the top of that little ridge that I'm looking for. And so that's how tall it is, but this is how far over it needs to be. So that little ridge, and now what I'm looking at is that ridge has got a slope, and I can guess what that slope is with my pencil and just estimate that same angle. I know that right here, and this is how tall it is. So let's get this erased. So I know that there's a little clump here, and I know that up here somewhere is the top, but I also know I'm pretty confident with this. The face of Half Dome, and I can compare from this angle to the top here, should be close to the same, and it doesn't feel close to the same. This feels like it's leaning. It goes up and it leans. This comes up and it leans. Actually, it's not too bad. And there's a little notch happening here. Now, what else is happening is I know that the back of that tree, I've got two little trees, and they will line up to Half Dome. And Half Dome is not as wide as you think. It's going to go there and point down at these trees. So this tree that I marked is actually as tall as this halfway point. I've got it really high. I've got this boundary. So I'm guessing now what is that angle from the top of this little tree to the top of here? And if I can get that angle right, it's about like that, and that feels about right. If I can guess that, it helps me imagine I can see that, but then it comes down. It helps me visualize. So I know it's from here to here, but then I've got this other tree, and it pokes up a little bit higher. And then I can see I can see that kind of a thing happening. And I can see the line of the mountains that go behind it, and the top of that tree is there, but it's also going up, and that you can see from the top of that tree to here. And then I've got a slope where it comes down this way. But you can see how easy it is to block in those main elements. Now we can define this just a little more. In between where this touches the face of Half Dome and this, there's something happening. This wants to come over, and I've got another vertical thing that's happening. And this comes down a little bit, and then it bites back down in here, a little higher there. Then there's this. You're just looking for the main changes. And then this part, there's a ledge that comes up and meets Half Dome. But what does it line up with? It's lower than the top of this tree, but it's higher than the top of that one. So that looks about, to my eye, where things should be. I'm coming over, I've got another little mark, and pretty quick you can block in some of the main angles. This will come in. This can confuse you. that comes down and stops. And then this comes in. I've got that. I've got some of that. So some of the main elements of Half Dome are blocked in, and I can look at the angle from here. It's actually pointing. I can use the angle of that to point to the top of this thing. And so whatever that angle is, it helps me create the face of that. And there's a ridge that comes out the back. There's also a ridge that will come down from behind a little bit. This kind of goes out. And now what I'm looking at is I know I've got that tree over here somewhere. And how tall is it? It's not taller than this. Just a little less. And then what is the shape of that tree as it comes down? So that angle, there's another rock here that kind of comes up and goes off, and I won't be drawing it. And the height of it, though, is if I look over here, it's about where these things are. And you just erase those guesses that don't line up. But now I can see that from that tree over to here, what if I divided that in half? Let's get it a little more. There to there. And then I look at what that halfway point is. There to there. Take a guess. Way short. I need it from there. Oops. There to there. Still short. From there to there. Not too shabby. You can see it just takes a few tries. Now, at that halfway point, I can say, well, what am I seeing out there? From there to there. Okay, this comes down. So you block in some things. That swoops out. This is the level of some trees. Right about here. Now I'm looking at in between things because I'm pretty confident that I got things blocked in. I've got this comes up and it notches. That's where this comes on. And I don't have to be precise because this isn't the focus of my drawing. If you've got some sketchy lines out there, great. But the main thing is, do you have this high enough as it should be with the other things? And you look at what's across from it and you go, well, the top of that lines up at the tip of the tree. So, and I'm a little high. So I need to cut some of the height off of this. And you'll notice that you'll have a tendency to draw things bigger. That's why when you're drawing stuff, you go, ooh, that's so cool. And then it gets bigger and it gets bigger and bigger and you run out of room. But as long as you have put those beginning marks down, everything you do will stay within where things belong. And now I see the background goes a little higher. Right here, it comes up as a swoopy thing. And what is it lining up with? I can see this, that came down, there's that. This part of Half Dome, there are some things that start lining up. I've got, if I follow that extension up, I can see that there's a slope of the canyon or the mountain there, and I'm going to, this helps me get the shape there. And now between this and this, it's mostly straight, but I've got something that bounces and interrupts it here. I've got some pokey things over there, and some more pokey things over here. But now it's just filling in the holes. And I know that this ridge right here comes down and joins and comes, so you can see the actual layering of the rocks that's, but right now the main elements are starting to fill in, and they're sitting where they should. And at this point, I've got the big elements in place where they go with enough confidence that now, there's one little thing. If I look at this angle and this outcrop, they are lining up, and this needs to come over. So I was a little low right there, and this will come over, and I can eliminate that little part. But after a few little sections of double checking, you should be pretty confident that things are in the right place. And at this point, I could take a photograph of this, and then I could go home and finish the drawing to as much as I want. But I'm pretty confident I've got things where they belong. There's the face of Half Dome right there, that little angle. The light's hitting it, and I'm getting a shadow right here. But that's not too shabby. I feel pretty confident that I could continue this at a later time in the studio. I've captured all the important things. So we're picking up where we left off. This so here's the sketch as we did it up in Yosemite National Park, and it looks kind of blocky. And I notice when I look at the lines, I can see kind of it's sketchy, and there's a so if I want to do this and as a finished drawing, a lot of this is going to get in the way. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to take a kneaded eraser, and I've rolled it into just a little bit of a cylinder. And if I take this and go over the drawing, it will lighten what I've already done. All right, that's a good enough start for right now. Now, when I look at the drawing, the first thing that I want to be aware of is what is it that I want to be the area of focus? And I don't want an even balance of tone over everything, or it's like the photograph. You're not going to know quite what it is I want to look at. But you will notice that Half Dome is closer to us, and these mountains are substantially farther away, and they are lighter. So this is the focus of the drawing. And so the first thing that I want to do is establish a bit of a tone. I'm going to just do this as a drawing.
And now I'm not applying really any pressure. I'm just letting the weight of the pencil float across the surface of the paper. And when I looked at the tone of the entire thing, there isn't the sky. The sky is the brightest part of the picture, and right here the sun is coming from this direction. This is in shadow, and the brightest part is here and a little bit on this shelf right here. And by applying this little bit of tone just with the pencil, then I'm going to take a paper towel and just kind of smear this. And so you're not really seeing the strokes that much. And this overall tone is this will be the lightest area in the drawing. So the tones in the mountain back here, there are some areas, especially on this face. The sun is hitting granite right in this area. And in the photograph, and when I was there, this was really quite bright, about as bright as the area here. But I'm going to take some license here because I want the focus of the drawing to be on Half Dome. So I'm going to leave, that's going to be the lightest value of everything back there. But here, I want to say that this area of Half Dome and this area is close to the paper. Everything else is going to go darker than this. So the first step that I want to make is I want to say that the darkest shadows of the drawing are going to be in this area. The face of Half Dome and personally I just work pretty loose. But this second value of tone that I've introduced also goes across this area and across this and here and blends up into there. And so this secondary tone that I'm putting down, and there is this area. I want to say that this is equivalent to the darkest areas of tone that are far away. So I have this area that is fairly light. I would say that that's some of the darkest tone. Also right about, let's see, okay, this area right here, I've got, I would say that's some of the darkest tonal area in the background that I want to bring attention to. And all of this until we get to, and there is a domed shape here that's catching quite a bit of light, but it's just outside of the drawing, so I'm not going to really mention it or draw focus to it. And down here in the valley, I have quite a bit of tone. And I'm going to take the paper towel and smear this area as well. And there is some of the shading, some tone in those mountains. And also, I'm not drawing very much attention to this, to the mountains back there. But that lays down a pretty good start on some secondary area of tone. And I want to be careful because I don't want to lose the edges. So at this point, to start to pull Half Dome closer to us and away from the mountains that are in the back, and I have to pay attention to this part. And there is a little bit of a ridge. And I'm touching a little bit of the point of the pencil in those areas. And there is a bit of some tree line right there. And this edge of Half Dome, as it comes up, it comes in, and this is a little darker than the actual face. And it's the trees themselves that are darkening the tone down here. This is granite. And there's an edge of the granite here. And that comes out. And there is an edge of the tree line that comes down this way. So to get the effect that I'm going to lose an edge here that blends into the background. But this building up of the tone, It's hard to talk and think of drawing at the same time. I apologize if my sentences tend to wander off. It's funny, sometimes in the transcripts I'll see, I know what I was thinking while I was doing the drawing. And then I'm listening to it and I'm going, what? This doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you're watching it, you can see what I'm talking about, so you'll have a better idea. So I think what I'm doing is I'm hinting. I'm not really focusing on specific sharp edges, except only in a few little places at this point. And there is a little bit of tone in here, but the sunlight is also capturing. But right here, the sun is hitting this area a little more, and it really drops into shadow. So I want to make sure that I'm focusing on the shadow shapes. And I want to take this and let it kind of wander off. And I've got those couple of trees. And in real life, those trees are close. They're some of the darkest elements. But I'm taking artistic license here, and I want the focus of this to be half dome and not these trees and things that are just really closer to us than half dome. So as I add those in, and I also notice that the height of this tree is a little different. It is off. It actually comes up about as high as that mark here. And the center line of that tree comes down. And in the finished drawing, I think I would just leave this kind of loose, since I don't want it to compete with the main subject, half dome. And at this point, I'm going to remove this line. And some of that. Let's take and blend this area, blend these tones. At this point, there's nothing about it that I want the viewer to say, oh, I can see the actual pencil strokes. They're there, I can see it, I'm aware of it, but the texture that the pencil strokes provide will only be in the touches of some of the detail area. And to sharpen some of the tone, it's like they're right here. I can pinch the end of this and actually lighten and edge where I need to. There is, right in here, a little touch of sunlight, and I can bring those out. Let's see, so at this point, I think the next thing that I would do, there are some details in the background, but I don't, like I said, I don't want to call a lot of attention, but a touch here and there will help communicate the medium that I'm using. I do want to feel that it is graphite. But I also want to keep the details soft out there. And I also want to start hinting or mentioning some of the foliage that's happening here in the foreground. And I can give a little bit of tone here. And lose the edge, let it blend in. Also, this line doesn't exist, the line from that tree. So let's just kind of lift that out and soften areas where that I can work an edge, hint at the edge of that tree. And again, I want to be a little subtle here with what's happening in the front. In real life, I'm looking at that line of trees that helps create a frame, but I don't want it to feel too straight, so I can kind of emphasize or break, add a little bit of changing of the form, and add a little bit of shadows, hint at some of the shading in the tree or in these bushes here in the front. But also trying to keep my attention on Half Dome and not lose track of what the central area of focus is. And finally, I would let some of the actual pencil, the graphite texture, stand on its own without blurring, as just a few touches. Once you actually start blocking in the shapes, and you get from that first video, as long as they're in place and you're really firmly, you're confident with where the edges of things are, your drawings, you can take them as far as you want. is just a little bit of a tree here, and I just want to hint at it because I don't want to draw attention away from Half Dome. And there is some attention. The lightness of this area, it is pulling a little attention. So if I can minimize some of the contrast in this area, just a bit, it will stop competing with things over here. But those are the kinds of choices that you would start making. Not start making, but you want to be conscious of these things. There are some forms texture-wise, and here there is a top of that. So giving a little definition to these forms in these mountains is a good thing. But these are the same choices that you'd be making in oil or watercolor. As long as you can be confident in blocking in where the forms are, that you're in a better place for the rest of your whole drawing. And there is just a little bit of tone back there that I want to there's one other, the top of it is feeling just a little messy because I can still see some of the detail. From the sketching. This is the way I work on, I guess, any drawing, as I want to gradually start building up that tone, and I find it helpful to pull back away for a day, work on it for a bit, and then I come back with fresh eyes and see. As I'm looking at it, my mind just goes completely into the drawing mode, and I'm trying to weigh what would need to be done next. And I find that I want to go, just not everywhere, but there are a few places. I want to see the pencil texture, but then losing some of that. This is the disappointing stage. This is the part where it's like, I spent what? I spent a half hour and this is all I got. But where it's at this point, it's at that everything just feels kind of muddy. I'm looking at it and going, it's coming out of the fog a little bit. And I realize, so what is it that I would want? Yes, I think I would like to have this framed when I'm finished. But what I don't want is I look at the photograph and I go, well, I don't want it as finished and looking like the photograph. I could just hang the photograph, But so it's that illustrator side of me that is looking at it and saying, so what is it that you want to do with this then? And as I look at this from across the room and I look at the photograph, obviously this is the area that calls my attention. If I continue just laying down tone, because in real life there are no lines in nature, nothing that separates the tones except changes of plane. I could keep pushing it and defining those forms and tones, and then I realized that, well, at the end, you're just going to have something that looks like the photograph, and I could just get the photo framed. But as an illustrator, what is it that I would want to call attention to? Obviously, half dome, and I want it to be separated from the valley. And I know I can see it in the photograph, but I want to emphasize that. So I'm going to use some of the tools as an illustrator. I can use a line to separate the foreground and the background. And it's tempting to dive in and start defining some forms with line here, because in the photo they're so clear. And there's a lot of interesting things happening here because that's fully in the sun. But there are things happening here that define half dome, but they're in the shade. And if I let that confuse me, and if I start to define with line some of these shapes here, it will pull the attention away from here into the background. So I have to make a conscious choice. To begin with, I'm not going to use lines here. I might at a later stage, but I want to use line to help pull and define these forms. And when I look at the point, right now the point of this has been defined from shading. And if I start to work some of the lines, it will get blunt pretty quick. So the first step that I want to do is this is a pencil sharpener for a lead holder. And that's getting to a fairly usable point. Yeah. And this area right here is a little bit of paper that can clean that end. But that's a pretty sharp point. And there's another thing that's happening. So before I start diving in, what I'm looking for is, since this is at the point, I was using a paper towel to smear the tone here. And that's what's given it this feeling of mud. So I want to clarify some of the tones, I want to clarify some of the shapes and just make sure that the things I've got stand out. The objective at this point now, I can start saying, since everything is muddy and that's not what I want, I want clarity. I want this area to be more defined. And it may not look like much is happening here. I'm just trying to sharpen up and define the edges there. So Half Dome itself is sitting on top of an area of, there are trees in these areas that are growing, but this is bare granite. And that is something that I want to define. This change of plane stands out. And you'll notice that just these little lines that I'm putting in pull attention to these areas. It doesn't, I barely touched the paper. And it's the change of the plane where the light is hitting it, and then this becomes vertical. It's a very specific and clearly defined edge. And as it turns here, there is a soft shape that breaks that. And it becomes less sharp. The planes break with different angles in this area. So it's not just a clearly defined sharp edge in these. And this edge, to separate it from the background of the other mountains in the valley, and you'll notice that I keep rotating the pencil to keep a sharp point. Now, right in here, this is an area where the tree line starts. So anything that I can do to separate this foreground from what's happening in the valley is going to make this a stronger drawing for me. I have to keep that sharp in my mind and not get distracted with adding details out here, because anything I add out there compete and start pulling away from here. I want to make sure that these forms, anything here is very clearly defined. But there is an area here where, in the photograph, this area, it loses an edge. And I like that. I don't have to keep the edge in. I don't want it to feel like it was just cut out and pasted on here. So but what this has done right now is it's created, what's happening in the valley back there. That edge is clear. Now this is closer to us than the rest. There's this edge here, and I want to emphasize that and bring it out. And where this wall of granite meets the tree line, interesting edge. And notice that with the edges, I'm not just drawing sharp lines. It feels like almost little dots, a stroke here and there. Now, there is another plane right here. This area, it joins with this one, but they go towards Half Dome, and then the wall of Half Dome joins this change of plane right here. So I want to emphasize that plane change. And when I'm looking at it in the photograph, it blends together quite a bit. But I can define that change to emphasize the clarity that I want. And now there is a highlight. Where this shape meets this shape. And this bare area of granite meets a tree line, but there is a very sharp, clearly defined area. And right here, there is a small plane change. The rock breaks right in there. And this edge between this vertical shape and this plane it tends to get kind of rough right in here. So it's not just a sharp line. There's a dark tone in here. And because I'm focusing not just on using lines, but areas of detail are going to pull the eye and pull the attention. So automatically I have this light area and this area of Half Dome are the brightest areas in the drawing, and they will pull the attention. And so any extra detail that I can add in those areas will help to draw that attention there. And it doesn't take a lot. Now this edge of Half Dome, when I'm looking at the photograph, there is an area of the top of Half Dome that actually matches the tone in the sky. So there's a lost edge here that's nice, and I'm not going to, if I were to draw a line that just outlined it, I would lose that effect. So there is a break in the change here. And this edge of Half Dome, where it meets the background of the valley, is one of the areas of strongest contrast. So I need to make sure to lighten that. And just help clarify that edge. It's one of the strongest edges in the drawing. And as it comes down, this tree line kind of meets there. And this is also where this tree takes some of the shape. And I have to be careful and not draw details in this tree that will start to pull away the focus. I want to hint at it, and now I want to start emphasizing this final edge. As it comes up, this is where I can lose or soften that edge. Now, there is some clarity that's starting to happen here. And in the photograph, that tonal area in the shadow is all fairly uniform. And what I want to do is start pulling in some of the defined shapes and telling the viewer what I want you to focus on what I think are important shapes in this drawing. Now there's an interesting thing that happens. This white shape really starts to get lost here, blending, and it moves down. What I'm trying to define is that there are, when I'm looking at Half Dome, these shapes here are closest to me, and this pushes back, and this pushes that way. So I've got this is conceptually a very, this is the angle that defines the face of Half Dome going in that direction and what's happening here. So anything I can do to help clarify this edge without just going, drawing a line in it, but how can I emphasize my awareness of that plane change? And so first of all, knowing where it is and making sure that things don't compete. There's so many interesting shapes. Here in the front, there are interesting shapes that start happening. There's a dip in the shapes here. And these are some prominent forms of granite that pop out from the trees. And I have to be careful because this is the part as an artist that is very satisfying, all the little details. And the tendency is, oh, I want to draw all of this fun stuff. But then if you just dive in and start doing all the details, it would be very easy for me to lose that sense of this area in the shade and this area in the sun. And what's happening is the way to emphasize this area that goes into the shade from this in the sun would be to just darken it and make sure that nothing here, how do I put this? Looking at the photograph, it's not that prominent. So if I made the tones all the same, I would start losing, it would start to flatten out the shape as it is here. This feels, that whole muddy feeling that I got from everything is because this very sharp, if I squint my eyes a little, I can really start to see that plane change of this all the way up to here, and this bites in, but this creates an area of shadow. And I want to make sure that the area of shadow that's turned away is darker than the tones in the highlight, even though the photograph doesn't . do it, how do I put it? The photograph flattens all of that tone, but I have the choice to emphasize those tones. Now, in the shadow right here, coming down, I have an area of light. So I'm just going to darken that edge of it. And I'm going to darken this edge of it. So all that's left is that white, I can't say white, but this little bit of a lighter area. And even hinting at a line. This is a tree line. And it comes here and it does the same thing down here. I'm doing the same treatment to emphasize some of these lighter areas. And rather than take the kneaded eraser out and try to lift those out, I can just increase the shadow areas around them. Another helpful thing is, rather than just relying on the darkness of the tones, I'm adding more tone close to that edge, and it helps. I don't know if soften is the right word, but that's what it's doing. But it's clarifying areas of tonal change without your eye going, oh, I can see the hard outline. Now there is something that in the photograph that's happening. The sun is hitting here, and it's causing a very distinct line. This shape here is casting a shadow. This ridge, as it moves back, there's a part of it that's focus, that's hitting light. So to capture that effect, and I do want to call attention to it because my eye keeps going there in the photograph, and I'm realizing that that's an area that I do want to call attention to. As it comes down and it does the same thing here, I'm emphasizing the trees that poke up into this area, and this area will be darker because it is well within this cast shadow area. And right now I'm just picking out some of the more prominent plane changes, secondary, that occur in the shadows, and trying to not compete, if that's making sense. Now, even though I'm calling attention to the shadow, there is an area, these trees they do break out of that sunlight just a smidge. And they join in that area. And I can slightly darken this area. And now what's happening is I'm trying to increase the contrast between this light shape and the dark behind. And I don't want to lose that edge. So there is a shift in tone there. Let me pick a different area to work on so I don't, if all of your effort stays in one area, you'll lose track of how the drawing is working as a whole, or the painting. So shifting around is always a good idea. And I'm trying not to be real specific in tone here. I don't want this to compete with what's happening. But I want to hint at, and there is a fairly clear tone change here. And now I can start to put in just a few of the branches of the fir tree. I do need to bring in just a little bit more of this shading to separate this edge from the face. And increase the emphasis of the tree line that helps separate that. there are a few little breaks that help focus attention on the granite surface. Most of it's smooth. But as I start to do this, I realize it's not quite that prominent. Let me pull that out. And then I focus on this area. There is just a little something there. Something that breaks this edge on the back just a little. A little bit of a line that's hinted at here. So right now the focus is pretty well defined here, but there's something lacking. It needs to feel just a little more grounded right here, and that grounded feeling is going to happen with the tone change of these trees. But I don't want to be real specific and call attention with detail down here. That's starting to, that grounds it a little more to my eye. And the focus is very clearly here. But I do want, there in the photograph, this area, there is so much sharp detail because the sun is hitting it. And I'm wondering if I can just do a little suggesting without taking away. That's a lot. I step back and I go, whoa, I can feel the pull of just the slightest touch. There's a little bit of a plane change here that is interesting. There is a little bit of a plane change here and tone change here. There is a very prominent change here and an area of tone But already that got stronger. I can just quiet it down a little bit. Again, anything I do over here, and if I start to feel it pulling, I have to be very careful. But these are the kinds of choices, adding that muddy overall tone, keeping it, but hinting at details. There is a hint at right here, this face is quite prominent, and I think it's helpful to define that because that is closer to us. Some of these little marks are just clarifying something in that tone without pulling. Yeah, it's such a delicate dance, I guess. And the other thing that's happened is there is some layering to the mountains. This area it joins here. So in space, Half Dome and this are closer in distance and can have just a little bit of separation. And the trees here, I've got a tree here, but I don't want to. Right now what's happening is it's very heavy over on this side, and I can help balance it. The lightness of this area can be brought out just a little. All it will take is a little bit of some tone touched and added in this tree branch. And there is a face right here that is catching some light. And if I hint at that edge, and it's like the edge of Half Dome, that helps balance just that little bit. There's a little bit of some lines. Most of this is some trees. And there are radiating lines that are happening right here that are interesting. But I have to be careful to not pull attention from here, but I need to give some presence. This area is probably the largest area of even tone. All of these trees in here, but there are a few edges of bare granite that are called out, and I think it would be good to hint at those. And there is a little bit of a tree line here that's hinted at. It needs just a touch of softening. So right now I'm just trying to balance the drawing. I want the clarity that is introduced with the detail we've added needs to have some balance and feel but without the same treatment, if that's making any sense. So this is in a similar range with this, but then the next level would be this. And this is what really has some of the strongest. Okay, this line, and some of the lightest, there's an edge right here that feels good to emphasize. But there's a deepest shadow that is happening here, and it's separating some tone. But I don't want to really, I have to be careful to not call, it's already gaining a lot of weight, just that little bit. I want a little, but not too much. And then there are some trees that are calling a little bit of some tone back here on this face of the mountain. And this is introducing some very small areas of detail that help to even out the entire drawing, give it some tone. And this area is another even area of trees down in here. And there are some lines that can help. That's starting to feel really pretty nice. So this is the point where I would step away for a day. I've probably spent another half hour on this, but this is how I tend to work on a drawing, is give it some time to sit, look at it with fresh eyes, and start to see, is it where it needs to be, or do I need to add just a little bit more? And my gut is telling me that it's a good stopping place right now, but there are just a little bit more areas of detail that will take it to the final level. This is the stage of drawing that I hate. I have it in my head, in my mind, what I want this to look like. And it's not there, and it doesn't even feel close. And I look at the amount of time that I've spent on this so far, and it's just, what am I missing? Why is it so different than what I see in my mind? And again, I've mentioned, I don't want this to be just an exact reproduction of the photograph. I want there to be a clear distinction between Half Dome, that's what this is about, but it's also a part of the valley, and it belongs there. And right now, the difference feels like maybe 20% of the valley back there and 75% of where I want this, So the difference is real substantial. And in my mind, yes, I do want there to be a difference, but how do I bring it just a little bit closer? If this was 75, sure, 60, 75%, but I need this to have a little more life than what I've got right now. So this is, you just dive in and every day give a new stab at it, right? So, and I'm looking at this little area here, and I remember when I was looking at it thinking, yeah, I want there to be a difference. The way that cast shadow comes down, and this should be darker because that's catching some light, but it's not full light. It's not as bright as this. And I don't know. It doesn't, something's just not clicking just yet. So I think what I need to do is, I can see something here. There's a little bit of tone on that mountain. And the thing that surprises me is just the tiniest little bit of tone that I start adding it hits it so so much. And again, and that's why I work light. And again, when I'm drawing, my brain it goes quiet, because language takes place in a different part of the brain than all this spatial processing. So forgive me for all the quiet places, but I'll talk about important decisions that jump to mind as I'm making them. I'm just going to start emphasizing some of the tones that I'm seeing in that background. And I think that will help breathe some life into this background. And there is just a little bit of something happening here. I can start to see some merging together of these tones. So even though I'm not darkening the overall tone, that this little bit of detail in those mountains is closing that gap that I've been looking for. This lost edge is one of the areas that was bothering, that was pulling things apart so much. Because the reason it's lost is because the tone, the value in tone is close and is similar enough, but I had it substantially lighter. So this is one measure that will help to close that gap, bringing those tones closer together. And it's interesting, when I'm working on this, when I first opened this up this morning, I was pretty discouraged, I think, because the distance between how far away it was from what was in my mind's eye, and I wasn't sure how to close that gap. But all of a sudden, just this little bit that I've been doing, it's feeling better. It's feeling closer to what's in my mind's eye. And it's surprising that the distance, to me, that's not that much. I mean, I've just been working on this a little bit, and it's closer than I thought it was. And that's a good feeling. This area is one of the more clearly defined. And so is this. Well, now that if I pull back a little and look at this, this has brought that background closer to these, and it's more of what I had in mind. I like that. I think I want to add just a little more, spend a little more time here, and it'll start to pull this together. And it's not as far off as I thought it was. And that's why it's so important to just work on it a bit, put it aside for a day, do other things, and come at it again the next morning and just keep doing that. There is a little sharp edge here. And it's funny when I think of this, I've drawn this in pen and ink in the past, and pen and ink is so strong that you make a mark and you got to be pretty confident with that mark. But with graphite, there's so much more room, so much of a gradual, slowly building up. That's feeling much better. That's closer to what I wanted. When I lean back and look at this, this is the area of focus, your eyes drawn to it. But there's enough detail here that it's pleasing to look at from my eye. There is just a little definition on that ridge line that would help. That feels better than it did this morning when I first looked at it. So I think I'm pretty close.